Alright, today I'm going to be teaching you to solve quadratic equations. Now, if you only know how to solve these 6 quadratic equations by yourself, then you have mastered solving quadratic equations. Literally. If you know how to solve these by yourself, then you know all 4 methods that I'm about to teach you. Hopefully. So right now, we have 4 methods for solving quadratic equations. Now the first one is called factoring. And I'm going to put some notes on the right side here to show you some useful notes that you might need for using each of these methods. So the first of the 4 methods is factoring. And now what this is that you split this kind of quadratic equation into this. Right? So for factoring, if you have 2 factors, let's just call them A and B, and when they multiply, that equals 0. Now, if 2 things multiply and equals 0, then that means that one of them must be equal to 0. Now, that means that, you know that anything multiplied by 0 has to be 0. So 0x, where x is like any number, will always result in 0. That means that if one of them, let's say that a is 0, right? If you assume that a is 0, if you assume that a equals 0, that means that 0b will equal 0. And this is obviously true, whatever vb's value is. And since this equation is true, we can just solve with a as 0. So I'll just show you what this means in the context of an actual equation. So you see here, x plus 1 and x minus 3 are multiplied together, and that equals 0. So that means that one of them, so let's just see both cases, okay? So you split this into cases. So case number 1 states that the first factor, in this case x plus 1, will equal 0, as you saw here. So one of A or B will equal 0. So we have to explore 2 cases. So we have the fact that A equals 0. This is case number 1. And then we also have B equals 0. So you need to look through both cases to find all the solutions. Because when you say solve an equation, you must find every solution. Okay, so now case number 1, we have x plus 1 equals 0. So, assuming that you already know how to solve a linear equation, we subtract 1 on both sides, which will still be the same equation, and we have x equals negative 1. Now this is the first case. So this is one of our solutions to this equation. But we still have another case remaining. Case number 2. Now case number 2 states that the second factor is equal to 0. So x minus 3 is equal to 0. And if you add 3 on both sides, we know that x equals 3, and that is our second solution. Now we have found all solutions to this equation. Because as you might know, all quadratic equations will only have a maximum of 2 solutions. So we have x equals negative 1 as one of our solutions, and x equals 3 as our other solution. Let's move on to the next one. So this one can still also be solved by only our first method, factoring. Now here I'll teach you a method of factoring a quadratic polynomial. In this case, x squared plus 4x plus 3. So, we split this let's just only look at this term for now. Let's only look at x squared for now. What times what will give you x squared in terms of x? Well, in this case, the obvious option is x times x, because x times itself equals x squared. And then let's look at only the positive 3 term. If we have positive 3, what times what will give us positive 3? Well, in this case, positive 1 and positive 3. And to check that these factors are in fact correct, we can multiply x and positive 3, which gets us 3x. If you get x and 1 multiplied together, we get x. This means that 3x plus x, when these two are added together, and that gives you 4x, this means that the factoring was correct. So we can see that x plus 1 and x plus 3 equals 0. Because one of our factors is x plus 2. X plus 1. And that's x plus 1. X plus 3, which is x plus 3. So we got both of our factors in. And now we're going to solve the same thing as normal. However, I'd like to take this opportunity to tell you about one precaution that you must take. So, when we have factors like this, let's say instead of equals 0, we have equals 3. If we do this, we can't just put x plus 1 equals 3 and x plus 3 equals 3 and solve it like that. No, these will not result in the solution that you want. Instead, the right-hand side must be 0. Now this factor must only apply for when the right-hand side is 0. So we must make sure that the right-hand side, for RHS, the right-hand side equals 0, and this is the most important in the factoring method. You must remember that. Okay, so x plus 1, x plus 3 multiplied together is 0. So we just split it into two cases. So remember we had case number 1 and then case number 2. Okay, we got that. Now, sorry, my handwriting kind of bad here. Yes? Okay. Now we can split it into two cases. So put one of our factors equal to 0 and put the other factor equal to 0. Then we have, subtract 1 on both sides, so you get x equals -1, and that is the first solution, and x equals -3, and that's our other solution. Got that, okay. So now, we'll move on to our second method. You see here, you can also use factoring for this one. I'm not sure if you can use it for factoring, but if you want to, you can. So it's no problem, but I will show you a much easier way to solving this type of equation. You see you have x minus 3 and this here squared. Well, what's the inverse of squaring? Well, it's taking the square root, of course. So the inverse operation of squaring is square rooting. So, I just take square root on both sides. But you must remember that this notation only tells you about the positive square root. So we must always put a plus or minus, or else you only find one of the solutions. And remember, we want to find all of them. So remember to put a plus or minus, and then the square and the square root will cancel out because they're inverse operations to each other. And then we'll just get x minus 3 equals plus or minus, and the square root of 4 we know is 2, because 2 squared equals 4. So just put plus or minus 2. Okay? And now the answer is 3 plus or minus 2. And this is our solution. But what happened to the two solutions? I thought why are there only one? I thought there were two solutions. Well, you see the plus or minus, right? So if you do want to put both solutions separately, you can. I'll do that here. So x equals 3 plus 2. Let's look at the plus part. So 3 plus 2 is 5. So x equals 5 is one of our solutions. The other one is 3 minus 2. Let's look at both of the cases, right? So 3 minus 2 is 1. Therefore, x equals 1. And this is our second solution. And we have both solutions done already. That's done. So this is both fine. So if you write it like this, it's correct. And if you write it like this, it's also correct. Like, it does not matter which one you use. It's just whichever is more convenient. Both of them will be marked as correct. Like when you go to assessment or an exam or something. So don't worry about that. However, there must be one precaution for taking the square root. I'll write that in the notes section. Taking the square root. I'll just write square root like that. So when you take the square root, we need to remember to always add the plus or minus sign. This is very important. If you don't do this when taking the square root, then your answer will be wrong basically. So always do this. Okay, let's move on to the fourth problem. And that is x squared plus 4x equals 1. Now what we can do is, you can also factor this, I think. I'm not sure. I don't think you can factor this. I haven't tried it. If you don't try it, that's fine. But honestly, I just want to go with the third method, completing the square. Now completing the square is a very interesting one, because you will get our first quote formula, not really a formula, but I'll call it that, okay? So completing the square, we have to add a certain magic number to both sides. And what this magic number is you see the coefficient of x. I also call the coefficient of x b. And why do I call it a? Well, it's a very specific reason that we'll get to, method 4. So, I just put the notes for completing the square. For completing the square, we can have multiple, we only have one formula. I don't know why I said multiple there, my bad. We have the 4 here, and let's call that b. So, when the coefficient of x is denoted as b, the magic number which you have to add 1 over 2b and then all in brackets squared. Got that? To both sides, of course. So what we have here is, we add 1 over 2b and then all squared on both sides. So in this case, b is 4. So what's half of b? 2. Right, so we just add 2 squared to both sides. In this case, that's 4. Since this is 4, 1 plus 4 is 5. And here, we have a very interesting thing happening. Because the name is completing the square, this left-hand side here will result in the square of the expression. Now what the expression that is half of b, which is 2. As you can see, we squared 2. So we get x plus 2 squared. Simple enough, right? Now if we expand the brackets, you'll obviously get the same thing, like x squared plus 4x plus 4. But you don't need to worry about that. Right now, we can just go back to our roots. Haha, very funny. Yeah, haha. Taking the square root, and we can take the square root of both. Remember the plus or minus. And then these two cancel out. So we have plus or minus square root of 5. And this is the exact form, so just leave it as square root of 5. It does not matter. Unless it tells you to give it to 3 significant figures or whatever, then you can just use a calculator to do that. I was gonna leave it like this. So x equals negative 2 plus or minus square root of 5. That is our solution. Now again, if you want to split it into 2 solutions, that's fine. But this is also fine, right? It doesn't really matter, as I said. Again, so yeah. So remember this formula, it's not really a formula. But we have 2x squared plus 8x minus 6 equals 0. Now this equation is an interesting one, because right now we can do completing the square for this one as well, but it doesn't look like it. Now, I haven't told you this yet, but for completing the square we have a lot of things that you have to know before you use this, which I didn't explain at all, so I'm explaining right now. So when we have an x squared, so in this case the coefficient of x squared must always be 1. So it must always be x squared at the front. So always have the equation in the form of the following, which is x squared, so no coefficient here, just 1x squared. So remember to have x squared, and then bx, where b is the constant coefficient of the x. And then we have not plus c, but we have the constant on the other side. Done. However, to make this more efficient, I'll say that b must be even. Okay? So to write that formally, so that b over 2 is an integer. And this is a set notation. You don't need to know about that. But basically, b has to be even. You can just replace that with b is even. That does not matter. Okay. That's fine. It's fine. Okay. Now we have something very, very important to mention. Since this does not have an x squared, it has 2x squared. So to fit this criteria, we must first add 6 on both sides so that the constant is on the other side. But before we do that, we can just divide by 2 on both sides. I'm going to do both sides being 0 over 2 is 0. So you just have equals 0 and then the 2 and 2 cancel out because these numbers are all even, right? So x squared plus 4x minus 3. Now, as we said, we can just move not move, but add 3 on both sides. And then we have x squared plus 4x equals 3. And let's just do the same thing. Half of 4 is 2 and 2 squared. So the same thing, add 2 squared. I just put 4 here. So remember that half of b, in this case 2, was the... Okay, sorry, my camera cut out there because I ran out of storage apparently. So that's sad. However, let's continue this video. So remember that half of b will be one of the factors in the square. So in this case, I just wrote that x plus 2 squared. Because half of 4 is 2, so x plus 2. And square that will give you 3 plus 4 is 7. Strike 7. And then what we do is we take the square root on both sides. As always, always remember the plus or minus. Remember that. Then what we must do is we must these two cancel. X plus 2 will equal plus or minus square root of 7. And of course this is also exact form. And then x equals negative 2 plus or minus square root of 7. And that's our solution. This is a bounded answer. Okay, so you have this. Now, I'll show you the method that works for everything, but not necessarily the fastest. So you have to decide which is the fastest for yourself. So always first try factoring, and then obviously taking the square root first, but usually that's not going to be the case. So usually try factoring first, and then complete the square, if factoring doesn't work. But if completing the square, I said that b has to be even, but this does not have to be the case. For completing the square, you can do this with any equation as well. But I just prefer it this way because if b is odd, then as you said, if you have it, it will result in fraction that's a bit complicated and it will probably be less efficient. Then the fourth method, which is quadratic formula. Yes, the famous quadratic formula. Now, completing the square works for all equations, but something else that works for all equations is quadratic formula. So if b is even, always use completing the square. If everything else does not work, if all else fails, use the quadratic formula. So this is like a fail-safe. Not necessarily that slow, but it's slower than completing the square if you have b as even. So quadratic formula, I'll just write it down here. Can the camera capture that? I hope so. So x equals, I'll actually write that up there because I don't really need notes for this. So I actually put the quadratic formula up there. It's not tall enough, okay. X equals 2a at the bottom. And then we, of course, negative b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac. If you're surprised by this, the fact that I know this, well, I'm into math. So obviously I would know this, but you gotta memorize this to learn the fourth method. It's obligatory, okay? So if we have 3a squared plus 4x minus 5, we'll just say that a is the coefficient of x squared. In this case, it's 3. B is 4. That's why I put b here, not a, because the coefficient of x and the quadratic formula is b. So I have to prepare you for that. B is 4, and then c is 5, negative 5. Remember that's negative 5, right? Because it has a negative sign here. So the term itself, the whole term will be negative 5. Okay? So remember that a is the quadratic coefficient, the term of the coefficient of the quadratic term, and then b is the linear term, and the c is the constant term. Got it? Got that? Okay. Now just plug it in. X equals 2a is 6, so times 3. B is 4, so negative b will be negative 4. Plus or minus, and then open the square root. And then b squared is 16 minus 4ac. And then ac, in this case, is 3 and negative 5. I recommend you put it like this, so you know what you're doing. So now we have 16, and then now this will result in a complex solution because here actually it will result in a complex solution. Never mind what I just said, okay? My bad. Because 16 plus 60. Okay? And yeah. If 16 plus 60 is inside the square root, if we simplify everything, you'll get 76 in the square root. And then negative 4. And this can actually be simplified to a third form, which is, if 76 is divisible by 2 squared, is it? Wait, hold up. Yep, yeah. So we have square root of 19, and then 2 squared, so we have 2 outside. So 2 root 19. So negative 2 plus or minus root 19, because we put the 3 here, right? Because this is just negative 4 plus or minus 2 root 19. That's everything done. Because this is even, so these two cancel out. So obviously the final answer for x is negative 2 plus or minus root 19 all over 3. This is using the quadratic formula, which is that. Thanks for watching, okay? So if you know everything here, you know how to solve every quadratic equation, hopefully, if I taught that well. So, I wish you all the best in your math journey. I'll see you guys soon. Peace out.